A little life. The city always looked different at night, softer, distant, and somehow kinder than it ever appeared in the hard light of day. The rain had just stopped, leaving the streets shining like dark glass, breathing steam from the underground grates. Daniel stood near the corner cafe window, watching the reflection of his own face blur into the world outside. He was 27, quiet, observant, the kind of man who rarely spoke unless words were necessary. People always said there was something gentle about him, something fragile and self-contained, as if he carried a small universe of memories inside him that no one else was allowed to touch. Across the table sat Mason, loud and alive, his laughter always a little too bright for the hour. He tapped his fingers against the coffee mug, talking about his latest painting project, hands flying through the air the way only passionate artists moved. And when the light hits the canvas, Mason said, his eyes glowing, "It doesn't just sit there, it breathes." "You know what I mean?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I think everything in your life breathes, except your plants." Mason burst into laughter. "Unfair. I keep at least one alive every 6 months." Their third friend, Arya, arrived late as always, with wind-tangled hair and a messenger bag full of music sheets. She slid into the booth beside Daniel and nudged his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked softly, a question she asked often, and one Daniel always answered the same way. "I'm fine," he said. But her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than usual. Because Daniel was never really fine. He lived carefully, walking through life as if the ground might collapse beneath him at any moment. He rarely spoke about his past, and when conversations drifted close to it, he changed the subject or left the room. He had scars, not just the ones someone could see, but the kind that lived deep in the bones, silent, permanent. Yet Mason and Arya never pushed. They simply stayed. And that was why Daniel trusted them, as much as he could trust anyone. Later that night, when the cafe lights dimmed and chairs scraped across the floor, they walked together through the mist-coated streets. Mason talked about color palettes and Arya hummed melodies under her breath. Daniel walked between them, quiet, listening, feeling something that almost resembled peace. For a moment, the city didn't feel heavy. For a moment, his life didn't feel small. But peace never stayed long. Not for him. As they reached the old brick building Daniel called home, a chill swept through the air, the kind that reminded him of winters he tried desperately to forget. His breath trembled. A memory brushed against the edges of his mind. A dark room. Footsteps. A voice he could never erase. His chest tightened. Arya noticed first. "Daniel." He swallowed. "I'm okay," he whispered, though his voice wavered. Mason didn't ask questions. He simply placed a warm hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We're here," he said gently. "Always." And for the first time that night, Daniel allowed himself to believe it. Even if only a little. The apartment was small, but it was warm, a quiet refuge tucked between aging brick walls and creaking wooden floors. Daniel liked it because it didn't echo. The sounds here were soft, the hum of the old refrigerator, the occasional whisper of wine through the window, the faint music Arya sometimes played when she visited. Mason and Arya stayed for a few minutes after walking him home, an unspoken ritual, as if leaving him alone too quickly might cause him to fade into the shadows. Mason wandered into the kitchen, opening the cupboard without asking. "You're out of tea again," he announced. "Daniel, my friend, this is a tragedy." Daniel managed a small smile. "You say that every week." "And every week," Mason replied, pointing dramatically, "I am right." Arya stood near the window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. Her voice was gentle when she spoke. "Do you want me to stay a little longer?" Daniel hesitated. He didn't like being watched when the memories came, but he also hated the silence afterward, the kind that wrapped around him like cold water. He nodded. "Yes," he whispered. "Just, for a while." They didn't ask questions. They never did. Instead, Mason made tea with the seriousness of a surgeon performing a delicate operation, while Arya hummed a soft, slow melody, something calming, something safe. Daniel sat on the couch, hands clasped together, breathing carefully. The tremor in his chest was still there, like a storm trapped behind his ribs. Sometimes the past didn't come as images. Sometimes it came as weight. A pressure. A voice. A feeling that the world was shrinking. He dug his nails into his palms, grounding himself, counting breaths the way his therapist had once taught him. In. Hold. Out. The room slowly steadied. The shadows loosened their grip. By the time Mason handed him a mug of tea, his hands had stopped shaking. Here, Mason said softly. Chamomile. Adult-level calming drink. Daniel gave a quiet laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was real. They talked about small things after that, music rehearsals, gallery deadlines, the ridiculous argument Mason had with his neighbor about recycling bins. The kind of ordinary conversations that anchored Daniel back into the present. And when the clock brushed close to midnight, they finally stood to leave. At the door, Arya leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him, a light, careful embrace, as if she knew exactly how much pressure his heart could handle. Text us, she murmured. If you feel heavy again. I will, he said. He meant it. He watched them disappear down the dim hallway, footsteps fading into silence. Then the apartment grew quiet. Too quiet. Daniel sat back on the couch, tea in his hands, eyes drifting toward the window. The city lights shimmered faintly in the distance, blurred by thin curtains of fog. He wondered, not for the first time, how long a person could carry a past before it finally broke them. How long a heart could survive under the weight of memories no one else could see. He closed his eyes. And for a moment, he felt very small. A little life. Fragile. Uncertain. But still beating. Still here. And somewhere deep inside him, beneath the fear, beneath the scars, a faint, stubborn ember of hope refused to die. The morning crept into the apartment quietly. Soft pale light slipped through the thin curtains, brushing across the wooden floor and the edges of the worn sofa where Daniel had fallen asleep without meaning to. His tea mug still sat on the table, untouched and cold. He woke slowly, the way people do when the night has been heavy. For a few seconds, he didn't know where he was. Then the room came back into focus. The familiar crack in the ceiling paint. The bookshelf leaning slightly to one side. The quiet hum of the city waking up outside. Safe. He told himself that word. Safe. But the feeling of safety was something he had to remind himself of, again and again, like a language he never fully learned but kept trying to speak. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and noticed the faint red marks on his palms where his nails had pressed into them the night before. He closed his hands slowly. He hated that part of himself, the instinct to brace against invisible threats. He hated that the past could still reach him across years and walls and distances. He stood, walked to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on his face. The mirror greeted him with the same tired reflection, quiet eyes, soft features, a face that looked calm to the world but carried storms behind the surface. No one would look at him and imagine what he had survived. Maybe that was a blessing. Maybe it was a curse. His phone buzzed. A message from Mason. Morning, poet. Eat something today. And don't say coffee counts. Another message followed immediately. Arya says hi. We're kidnapping you for dinner later. Daniel stared at the screen for a moment, a small, reluctant smile forming at the corners of his mouth. He typed back slowly. Okay. I'll be there. He didn't always know how to say thank you. So being there was the closest thing he had. He got dressed, buttoned his shirt carefully, and stepped outside. The street smelled like rain and freshly baked bread from the bakery downstairs. People walked past him, strangers with their own lives, their own small invisible battles. Sometimes that thought comforted him. Sometimes it made him feel unbearably alone. On his way to work, he passed the old bridge, the one that stretched across the narrow river like a tired arch of memory. The water below moved quietly, reflecting the gray sky. For a moment, he stopped. Years ago, he had stood on this very bridge on a night he never talked about, a night when everything inside him had felt empty and broken and unbearably heavy. He remembered the cold metal railing beneath his hands. The wind. The silence. The decision he had almost made. He swallowed. Not today, he whispered to himself. Not anymore. He turned away and continued walking. The world didn't know how close it had come to losing him. But Mason knew. Arya knew. And that, somehow, was enough to keep him here. For now. Daniel worked at a small architectural studio tucked above a bookstore, a quiet place filled with rolled blueprints, pencil sketches, and the faint smell of paper and old wood. It wasn't the job he once dreamed of, but it was steady, peaceful, and predictable, 3 things he had learned to value more than ambition. The office was calm that morning. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, landing in warm stripes across drafting tables. The radiator hissed softly in the corner like a sleeping animal. Only 3 people worked there on most days, and everyone spoke gently, as if the walls themselves preferred silence. Clara, the firm's senior architect, stood over a large drawing board when Daniel walked in. She was in her late 40s, thoughtful, sharp, and endlessly patient. She glanced up and greeted him with a small nod. "Good morning, Daniel." "Morning," he replied, setting his bag down. She studied him for a second, not intrusively, just observant. Clara was one of those people who noticed things without saying them out loud. The kind of person who understood that some truths lived quietly beneath the skin. "You're working on the community center plans today," she said gently. "Take your time with the courtyard layout. It matters." He nodded. He liked the project. A small building, modest, built for children and families, a place meant to feel safe. That word again. Safe. He traced lines across the blueprint with slow precision, sketching pathways, garden spaces, benches under trees. Places where people could breathe. Places where no one would feel trapped. He didn't design for beauty. He designed for relief. Hours passed quietly, broken only by the scratch of pencils and the distant sound of pages turning downstairs in the bookstore. Daniel lost himself in the rhythm of it, the clarity of shapes, the certainty of angles. Here, the world made sense. Here, nothing could surprise him. But healing never moved in straight lines. At lunch, he stepped outside to sit on the small stone steps by the entrance. The sky had brightened, and sunlight spilled across the street like scattered gold. He took out a simple sandwich and ate slowly. 2 children ran past him on the sidewalk, laughing, dragging bright paper kites behind them. Their voices echoed with a kind of joy he had never known as a child, careless, fearless, loud. Something inside him tightened. He didn't remember running like that. He didn't remember laughing like that. He remembered rooms with locked doors. He remembered voices that never sounded kind. He remembered learning, too early, how to stay small and quiet. A shadow flickered across his expression. He looked down at his hands. The scars there were faint, small pale lines on the skin, but he could still feel them as if they were new. He closed his fists softly. He had spent years pretending he didn't remember. But the body remembers everything. The sound of footsteps behind him broke the silence. He turned. Clara stood there with a paper cup of tea. She didn't ask what he was thinking. She simply sat beside him and handed him the cup. "For you," she said. "You looked like you needed warmth." He accepted it quietly. They sat together in silence, the kind of silence that didn't demand explanations. After a moment, she spoke, softly, carefully. "You're very kind to the spaces you design," she said. "You think about how people feel inside them. Most architects don't." Daniel blinked. He had never thought of it like that. He hesitated, then asked, almost in a whisper. "Do you think that matters?" Clara looked at him, eyes steady, gentle. Yes, she said. I think kindness always matters. Her words settled into him like light finding a dark corner. He didn't respond. But something inside him shifted. A small step. A quiet beginning. Not healing. Not yet. But the faint possibility of it. Evening came quietly, the city wrapped in soft gold light as the sun dipped behind distant rooftops. Daniel walked slowly toward Mason and Aria's apartment, the air cool against his skin, the sky wide and calm above him. Dinner with them was always the same, messy, warm, loud in the kindest way. Mason burned the bread again. Aria teased him. Laughter filled the kitchen like music. Daniel watched them move around the room, these two people who had stayed beside him when life felt unbearable, and he felt something stir inside him. Not relief. Not perfection. But presence. After dinner, they sat on the balcony. The city below glowed softly, thousands of windows, thousands of lives, each carrying its own story. Aria leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder. You're quieter than usual, she said gently. He took a breath. For years, he had kept the past buried, sealed in a dark corner of his mind because speaking it felt dangerous. But silence had its own weight. And tonight, he was tired of carrying it alone. There are things about my past, he said slowly, voice unsteady, that I've never told anyone. Mason didn't move. Aria didn't interrupt. They just listened. I wasn't safe when I was young, Daniel continued. Not for a long time. I learned to be quiet. I learned to disappear. I thought, if I stayed small, maybe I could survive. His hands trembled, but he did not stop. There were days I didn't think I would grow up. Nights I didn't think I would make it to the morning. And even now, sometimes it feels like I'm still there. Like I never left. Tears gathered quietly in his eyes. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mason leaned forward, voice soft but steady. You're not there anymore, he said. You're here. With us. And you're alive. That matters. Aria's hand found his. You don't have to carry it alone again, she whispered. Daniel closed his eyes. And for the first time, the memories did not crush him. They hurt, but they did not own him. The night breeze brushed against his face. Somewhere in the distance, a train moved across the tracks, steady, certain, moving forward. A small life. But his. Days turned into weeks after that. Daniel didn't suddenly become whole. Healing didn't arrive like sunlight breaking through clouds all at once. It came in small ways, slow mornings, quiet conversations, moments where he chose to stay instead of run. He kept designing buildings meant to feel safe. He kept meeting Mason and Aria for late-night tea and laughter. He kept breathing. One evening, months later, he stood again on the old bridge. The river below shimmered softly under the fading sky. He rested his hands on the railing, the same place where once, long ago, he had nearly let go. This time, he did not feel pulled toward the edge. He felt grounded. Present. Alive. He whispered into the open air. I'm still here. It wasn't a victory cry. It wasn't loud. But it was enough. Because survival, he had learned, was not dramatic or heroic. Sometimes it was simply choosing to stay. Choosing to wake up. Choosing to take one more step. A little life. Quiet. Fragile. Imperfect. But beautiful, because it continued. And Daniel, for the first time, believed he deserved to live it.